Welcome to the skin-crawling world of flaying, the art of peeling a person's skin off layer by agonizing layer while they were still alive. The executioners, who clearly needed better hobbies, would start with sharp knives or specialized tools, making precise incisions at the wrists, ankles, or face, wherever the skin was easiest to grip. From there, the skin was carefully stripped away. In especially creative cases, they would even tie the skin to the rope and pull it off in one horrifying tug-of-war. To make it even worse, they would pour salt or vinegar onto the exposed tissue to amplify the pain. The torture could take hours or even days, depending on the crime or how the executioner wanted it to be, with the victim often succumbing to shock, blood loss, or infection. The Assyrians, known for their flair of dramatic public punishment, sometimes display the victim's skin on walls as a gruesome warning. Meanwhile, the Aztecs had more ritualistic twists. They would wear the skin like a grotesque fashion statement to honor their gods. Enter the brazen bull, the ancient torture device that turned execution into a sizzling spectacle, allegedly dreamed up by Prelos of Athens for the tyrant Phalaris of Sicily. This gruesome contraption was a hollow, life-size bronze bull designed for slow roasting its victims alive. The unlucky soul was forced into the bull through a trapdoor, which was then securely locked, ensuring no dramatic escapes, and then a fire was lit beneath the bull, gradually heating the metal until it turned into an oven of excruciating agony. The victim would be roasted, with their skin burning, lungs searing, and body succumbing to the suffocating heat. But wait! This wasn't just about raw pain, it was about presentation. The bull was engineered with an acoustic system, a series of pipes and chambers that transformed the victim's screams into an eerie bull-like roars. And now the tyrant and his audience could enjoy the performance without being bothered by the unpleasantness of human suffering. Some accounts even claim that Prelos was tricked into demonstrating his invention and became its first victim. If you think a bad camping trip is a torture, you've clearly never heard of Scaphism, the ancient Persian method of turning people into human buffet for bugs. This nightmare, also called the boats, was as creative as it was horrifying. The victim was stripped naked and sandwiched between two hollowed out boats, with only their head, hands and feet sticking out. Then came the gross part. They were force-fed milk and honey until their stomach was a gurgling mess, and the excess was smeared over their exposed skin. Why, you ask? To attract every insect in a 10-mile radius. Trapped in this sticky, stinky setup, the victim couldn't move, couldn't escape, and certainly couldn't swat away the swarming bugs, which began to feast on their flesh. Meanwhile, inside the boat, their body became a breeding ground for maggots and flies, all fueled by the rancid milk-honey mixture they'd been forced to ingest. This wasn't a quick ordeal either. It was a slow, agonizing death by dehydration, infection, and well, being eaten alive. Let me introduce you to the rack of the Chariot, the torture device that didn't just stretch you out, it stretched you apart. This horrible invention featured a sturdy wooden frame with rotating rollers at either end. Once you strapped in, the real horror began. The torturers would crank the rollers, methodically pulling the victim's arms and legs in opposite directions. The slow and deliberate tension would stretch the body to its breaking point. Tendons would snap like overused rubber bands. Joints would pop out of their sockets, and in extreme cases, muscles and ligaments could tear completely away from the bone. For an added touch of sadism, some versions of the device included iron spikes on the rollers that dug into the skin as the victim was stretched, or sharp edges beneath the body to lacerate the back during the ordeal. As if this weren't horrific enough, the process was often paused just before a fatal injury, giving the victim a moment to contemplate their misery before the torture resumed. And in most cases, the goal wasn't even death, but a long-term mutilation, leaving the victim permanently crippled as a living reminder of what happens when you cross the wrong people. Impaling, the torture method that really nailed the whole pain in the ass concept. Popularized by the delightfully twisted Vlad the Impaler, a long sharpened stake, often greased for easy insertion, was typically inserted through the lower body. most commonly through the rectum or in some cases the abdomen, and carefully pushed upward. The executioners were masters of anatomy, carefully angling the stake to avoid puncturing the vital organs. Instead, the stake would weave through the body, eventually emerging through the shoulders, neck, or even mouth, ensuring in a slow, agonizing death that could last for hours or even days. Some accounts even suggest that Vlad preferred blunt stakes over sharp ones, as a dull tip prolonged the suffering. And the poor victims weren't just left to die in private, they were hoisted upright, and the stake firmly planted in the ground, displayed for all to see. And finally, gravity did the rest of the work, slowly pulling the body downward along the stake, causing further internal damage and devastating pain. Crucifixion, the torture that turned execution into a full-body endurance challenge. This gruesome practice, famously used by the Romans, involved nailing or tying a person to a wooden cross to suffer a slow and painful death. Victims were stripped of their dignity and clothes, then hoisted up in a way that made breathing a Herculean task. With arms stretched wide and legs sometimes bent awkwardly, every breath required pushing up on a nailed feet or pulling on nailed wrists, sending waves of agony through the body. Dehydration, blood loss, and suffocation were the main culprits behind the victim's demise. To heighten the torment, executioners often added creative touches, like breaking the victim's legs to speed things up, or placing the cross in a busy public area for maximum humiliation.